everybody. It's really great to be here. My name is Dan Manges. I'm the co-founder and CEO of RWX. We're a cloud computing company. For the engineers in the room, we're specifically a continuous integration and continuous deployment platform. For the non-engineers in the room, that means we run all of the automation that engineers want to run on top of code changes. So really just kind of a specialized cloud computing platform. Prior to co-founding RWX, I was the co-founder and CTO of Root Insurance, built here in Columbus. Spent 6 years building that company through its IPO in 2020. And prior to that, I was the founding CTO of Braintree, which is a payments company. Not super well known, but Braintree acquired Venmo, which is a bit more well known. And really excited to have a couple experienced builders here on the panel today. And I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having us. Great to be on a panel with Dan, who's an incredible entrepreneur. My name is Yonatan Raz-Fridman. You can call me Yon. I'm a repeat founder, mostly in the consumer technology space, anywhere from a computer company that I founded in London that allowed anyone and beginners to build and code their own computer that scaled globally around the world, to a VR company called Kodo, and most recently Supersocial, a game studio and creative agency that just recently got acquired by a publicly traded company. I'm originally from Israel, moved to Columbus via London and New York with my Columbus native wife and our daughter, and we live right here. And I'm really incredibly excited to be building in this thriving ecosystem and help cement kind of Silicon Heartland as the next frontier.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here as well. I'm David Landreman. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Empora Title. We are a startup in town. We actually have an office right downtown. We recently moved out of a WeWork about 8 months ago, so shows you where we're at in our journey from a startup. I come back from a background of technology, so my career has been product and engineering focused. I've worked both in larger organizations, so I spent some time in the traditional media space. I also have spent a couple stints in healthcare, really figuring out how to apply AI into healthcare. And then Empora really is, at its core, is about basically focusing on investors and connecting them with properties and providing like title services as they go through real estate transactions effectively.
Great. Well, let's dive in. And Jan, congrats on the acquisition.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
To get started here, I'd love to talk a little bit about the other ecosystems, Jan, you've been a part of. You mentioned that you've made your way to Columbus through other cities, and we just love some high-level observations about what you saw there, things maybe that we could learn and bring here to Ohio.
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of growing up in Israel and being exposed to that ecosystem as I was growing up, and obviously starting my career, and then spent 5 years in London and then almost 5 years in New York before we came to Columbus. And I think what's really incredible that I've seen in each of these ecosystems, that of course each one of them has its own unique characteristics, but like any kind of geographical area. But the one thing that I've always was amazed by is the density of talent, and also the way people come together who come from different backgrounds and professions and multidisciplinary capabilities. So for example, in Israel, obviously we have the military service that really provides an opportunity at a very young age, not only to be exposed to incredible opportunities to build and create, and which led to really the Israeli Defense Force becoming almost this sort of incubator of amazing startups. And we just recently saw one of the outcomes where a company called Wiz that founded less than 5 years ago just got acquired $32 billion by Google. But the interesting story there is that the founders of the company actually been through together for 20 years as a team, all the way from the military service. And so Israel has that uniqueness. The military service is really as an incubator of talent and teams, very technically driven. In London, it's the most international city in the world. I think London is the only city in the world where more than 50% of the population, maybe that has changed after Brexit, but as long as I was there, more than 50% of the population actually came outside of London, so not locals. And so when I built my first company there, by the time after 5 years of running it, I moved on, more than 75% of our talent in the team were actually international. We had very few local people. We had engineers coming from Czech Republic, Spain, Italy, France, and other places around the world. And that not only provides you with access to incredible talent in Europe, but also different culture, different perspectives on company building, and ultimately really providing you great optionalities as you think about growing the company. And London was also, at the time when I was there, which was 2012 to 2017, really invested a lot in the ecosystem. The city set up all kind of program like Tech City that really brought organically together entrepreneurs and founders to talk to one another. And then New York, of course, is in a way kind of a scaled version of both what London and Tel Aviv has done. And I think what's really unique that I feel I've seen in those territories that I believe is starting to happen in Ohio, and I think there is 100x opportunity to really scale that, is not only building that density of talent, but also how to make sure that startups, enterprises, government, an incredible organization like what Chris and the OhioX organization are doing to really collaborate and bring different people, different background, different talent together, because you really need these multidisciplinary teams to build globally successful companies. And I think, in my opinion, that's one of the next big frontiers and opportunities for Ohio Tech.
Yeah, thank you. Love the perspective on the ecosystem, and as you just mentioned, it really emphasizes the importance of OhioX and so many people here in the room. They're working to build this community. You mentioned talent throughout that overview several times, and I'm curious to get your perspectives on what are ways that you can attract the very best talent to come and work for your companies? Like, what is it that people are looking for in opportunities and a work environment? David, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, there was a time in the past where if I were to ask that question, I would have thought it would have been something about the opportunity to move with or work with modern technology, what the tech stack looked like, all this kind of stuff. As I've grown in my career, one of the things I realize, there's actually probably two things. One is your current staff is perhaps the most important thing from like a recruiting perspective. And like if your staff that you have on board is aligned, understands, and is excited about the vision, they understand their role towards getting to that vision, their accountabilities, and they feel empowered to do it, you're going to end up in a spot where by the time someone gets to this place where they're having the in-person, the behavioral interview, actually talking with the team, that person is going to want to lean in so hard because they can feel it from the engineers you've already got in the building. They're excited to work with those people. And actually at Empora, since I've been there, one of the more interesting things that's happened to me is we haven't grown too much. We're talking less than 10 engineers, but 100% of the engineers we've hired while I've been there have actually been network connections from the existing engineers that are people that like my engineers have worked with in the past, and they've all been referrals. And so effectively my team is on a day-to-day basis looking through their networks, finding people that they think would be a good fit for Empora, but it speaks to the fact that the engineers at Empora understand the vision, they're excited about it, regardless of the tech stack, regardless of all the kind of the technical nuances of what they're going to be doing, they know there's hard problems to solve. And so I think that's kind of been one of my big takeaways and learnings about recruitment.
Yeah, I think that perspective is really important because you're not attracting a lot of talent that is super passionate about the title industry, right? Like it's other aspects of their work that are really meaningful. I mean, Jan, you maybe are a little bit better off in that regard. You're building virtual worlds, which maybe people do find like that product in and of itself. But David, I think we kind of share that in common with past experiences. Like throughout my time building Root, I wasn't really recruiting a lot of product designers or engineers who were super passionate about insurance, but they weren't passionate about working with talented people, working on hard problems, and feeling like they're doing meaningful work. Yeah, actually, I was on that front. One of the things, so I agree with that, title insurance and real estate title on its face, not particularly exciting, but one of the things when I talk about the vision with my team, and I think it's important, it's like we're not trying to just optimize title and make title exciting. For anyone who's around Columbus or Central Ohio, it's a pretty well-known fact that like Central Ohio is growing pretty fast, and like housing and apartment starts lag behind kind of new construction. So one way to help solve that and to keep like housing prices from rising is to actually reinvest in houses, like bring them back up to like speed, basically flip them in a way. But when you do that, though, I'm excited for this place where our vision is. We allowed some investor to take a property, bring it back to market, bring it back up to speed that without our tools, without our technology, they may not have done it in the first place.
And so when you start to see that, it starts to connect you with like a bigger vision and a bigger problem that exists out there beyond optimizing title.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, there's obviously a lot has changed, and we live in a time with so much uncertainty, right? Even large corporations are no longer quote unquote safe. I mean, the industry that I've been operating for the past 5 years, which is kind of gaming and interactive entertainment, has been one of the biggest layoff industries. I think 9% of all the total layoffs in the United States over the last few years have been from that industry. Thousands of people. You've seen big technology companies laying off people. And that happens in parallel where you have basically a whole new generation that is joining the workforce. And there was a report that just came out, I think last week, an article on The Atlantic that showed that more than ever any other time before, a lot of graduates, even from top institutions in great program, MBAs for example, are actually struggling to find a job. And I think if anything, that provides an opportunity for kind of a new grassroots movement of workforce opportunity for small, medium-sized businesses, not necessarily venture-backed startups, but just in general, services companies, small and medium-sized businesses, of course, startups. And ultimately, yeah, if not everyone is building rockets that are redeployable like SpaceX, but I think it's ultimately what I've discovered is people want to work in a place that respect them, where they have an opportunity to grow, and they can collaborate with like-minded individuals and great people. And the one thing that, and I'm curious about your input as well, just from the Root experience, and even now, one of the things I've discovered about talent is that increasing salary will take you that far when you talk about talent, especially with today's generation and the remote work. People sometimes work multiple jobs at the same time without really telling their employer. And really, I've been focusing on creating an environment where people truly feel empowered. And I think, millennials and even more so Gen Z, they really care about like the way they're treated, having that sort of like very aggressive organizations and too dominant leadership just doesn't work anymore. And I've been called out as CEO multiple times by my team of like, Jan, that's just not going to work. Like I'm talking to a 22-year-old, where back in the day, they would have been much more submissive to corporations. And so building an organization and a culture where people truly feel empowered, and I believe that ultimately, if people don't grow, they're just not going to stay with you. Now, of course, to grow, they need the economic engine of the company to be able to support growth opportunities and taking on more responsibility. But what I've seen is that for the very best talent, you give them a room for growth, an opportunity to improve and develop themselves, and that will always be even more important than whatever salary you can offer. I'm not saying let's not offer great compensation to people, but I'm saying it's by far not the most important thing, at least from what I'm seeing over the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And one thing that I do appreciate about technology is that it is a great equalizer. I talked to a lot of people who are entering the workforce coming out of college about this, that some of these technologies have only been around for a short period of time, which means you can become one of the most experienced people with using these technologies despite the fact that you're at the very beginning stages of your career, which I think is something to really take advantage of and apply. And I appreciate the perspective on the workforce too. I mean, we've talked before, and you used to pay people in Robux, is that right, for work?
Everything works today. Yeah. Virtual currency, Bitcoin, I guess people are open for all kind of compensation mechanisms.
Right, yeah. So, I think it's great to understand what people actually want and not just apply, a playbook that's been around for a long time, but be adaptive, listen, and be understanding. So, I mean, the main thing here is just talking about, the work that's meaningful. And I think regardless of the industry, the scale and impact that it has, like what you said, David, around the number of people that are impacted by title and real estate transactions and what that does for economies. And we have a lot of that here in Ohio. We have a lot of very big enterprises that have a lot of capital that work on products and services that impact a lot of people. And those are things that are really compelling opportunities for people who want to work with talented people on things that affect a lot. And I think staying in the theme of people wanting the opportunity to do their very best work, I'm curious for a perspective on the tools that people use to actually work. Because while maybe I agree with you, David, that a lot of people I know actually don't care that specifically about exactly which technologies they want to build or they're going to use to build products. But I think they do care about the tools they get to use, or just having the opportunity to feel like they're working as productively as possible and doing their best work. And I know you shared a little bit with me before about your adoption of AI tools in the work at Empora, and would love for you to walk us through that.
Yeah, I think the tools are important, and I think actually more now than ever, constantly reevaluating the tools. So having a quick path to adopting tools, but then also having a quick path to dropping tools, just because like with AI, so much is changing so quickly. One example of this is I was pressuring my engineering team, and I asked them who's using AI to help them like do code dev. 100% of the team said, yeah, I'm using Copilot. And then when I dug deeper into that, really what it meant was I'm kind of asking some questions. It is kind of this thing that sits there on the edge, but isn't really a core part of my workflow. So we went from that knowledge to getting the team together to doing like a tech talk, lunch and learn on Cursor. So for anyone who's not familiar with Cursor, it's a fork of Visual Studio Code that like deeply integrates AI, LLMs, and a lot of people are using it to kind of actually start doing a lot of coding for production using AI. But so we did a tech talk, lunch and learn on this, and that was on a Wednesday, and by Friday, I had the whole team had switched over to it. But the interesting learning from that for me was it was the awareness of getting the engineering team to know why this tool change made sense. And it wasn't, the initial reaction was, oh, is this just so I can code faster? Because it's not going to allow me to do that. It feels like a junior engineer at best. I can probably just write this code. And I came back with two things. I'm like, one, better or worse, LLMs are going to continue to evolve quick. They're going to continue to change kind of how we work. And this is actually an opportunity for you as an engineering team to actually all like level up your skill set to understand this better. And then beyond that, I think it was really important that I also kind of, how do I say this? I presented to them like the fact that it wasn't just about writing code, it was about processes we could change. And so one of the things, you might have heard the term vibe coding, which is growing in trend right now. It's this whole idea of I'm just gonna sit down and have AI build me a basic application. If anyone's ever tried that, it kind of works. You'll end up with some code that's terrible, but you can click through it and it's fun. But there's actually, from a workflow perspective, there's something really interesting you can do with that. You can ask yourself, why would I do Figma mocks when I can effectively vibe code up something for like a clickable demo that I'll still expect to throw that away just like I would potentially a Figma mock, but it opens up this idea of a new process that the engineering team can take. And since we've done that, I've actually seen the team kind of explore that a little bit in terms of like actually just generating some mocks straight in code with the trust of leadership that we will not consider that completed code that we're going to release to production.
You know, I think obviously there's a very diverse, I think, group of people here with anywhere from, I'm sure, small, medium-sized owner businesses to large enterprises. And you know, I think we're at a really interesting shift generationally when it comes to the way companies are operating. And you know, I've seen it for myself where a lot of the people I've employed were, you know, quote unquote Gen Z, you know, under 25 years of age. And you know, there's a quote from a learning scientist called Alison Gopnik, and she says in one of her books, she says that children are the R&D department of the human species, right? And so, you know, which is so true. But beside, you know, putting aside the philosophical side of it, when you hire young people, right, if it's fresh graduates or, you know, 20-something-year-olds, I think the one thing that I've learned to appreciate as a CEO, and I really encourage everyone here to keep that in mind, even if you're in a, you know, 50,000 plus company enterprise, is that the way they think about work and their ability to adopt and experiment with different tools is much more resembling, you know, kids playing with toys than the way we may be exploring and experiencing these different tools. And I think because we're at that transformation that is happening, which we're not even fully aware at the moment of how it's going to impact the way we operate, although there are certainly, you know, suspicion of how much it's going to automate and make us all faster, better, hopefully prettier, is to kind of learn to encourage and have a DNA that allows for experimentation. And you know, the experimentation obviously is much less risky when it comes to like, hey, let's try Cursor or some other developer tool. But it's also all the way to like experimenting with new ideas and new ventures and so on and so forth. And I think we live in that incredible time where, if I'm connecting it to what I've mentioned a few minutes ago around how critical it is for that generation that is coming into the workforce now to really feel like they're learning, contributing, and growing, and being able to develop themselves and feel like they're making an impact. This is part of that, right? And I think there's an amazing opportunity to hone in on their instinct and what they're bringing from outside. And we've seen that wave before with enterprise software. I mean, my wife just left a big corporation, Estee Lauder, after 17 years, and I'm helping her get off the ground a new venture. And one of the things I told her, well, I'm going to introduce you to a whole new world, in a world where there is Slack and there is Notion. And she's like, what's that? Why can't we just stick to Teams and Microsoft Teams and OneNote? I'm like, we can, but and all of these enterprise products have really been consumerized in a way because this is what people want to work with, right? And so I think that's part of that, and all of these AI tools are really an incredible timing to experiment until you can really see what can fit into the production.
Yeah, there's a couple things that stand out there in what you just said. I think one is the collaboration tools. For my company now, we actually provide most of our customer support over chat applications. Slack, Discord, Teams, we'll use pretty much any one. But it's so much faster than going back and forth over email or scheduling a meeting to make progress. We largely work asynchronously. A conversation breaks out, and then we decide to hop on a screen share, and we do this with our customers regularly. The other thing that I've seen a lot, we do at RWX a lot of implementation work for our customers where we're helping them with their code base, integrating them into our platform, and I found a really wide variance in a company's ability to respond to experimentation and change and do something new. There's certain customers that we work with that are very quick to say, yeah, go ahead and change that. Totally happy for you to configure our software to work in a different way. And there's others where they're very apprehensive to make a change. They're not sure who they need to check with or what they can do to make that change happen faster. And I'm curious, given your experiences, especially David, I know you spent a lot of time in healthcare, which is probably like a very difficult industry to work in. Like, how does that spectrum look to you from an organization's willingness to actually be able to experiment and make changes? And what does it look like when organizations are doing that really well?
Yeah. From my time in healthcare, probably the biggest learning I had here was, so when I was in healthcare, our internal stakeholder on the hospital side would usually be someone VP level or exec suite. And this person would understand the level of innovation, be excited about it, and be like at the top of the organization really championing this. And what would happen is we'd go and get into the project, what we would see is there's a lot of process, security compliance, IT teams that weren't really given the right guardrails to understand how to react to this initiative because it was going to pressure some of the compliance, some of the security things that were in play. And as we learned more about this, it actually got to this point where we recognized we almost needed to understand the security posture of the organization we were getting into and almost to help them guide effectively how to navigate this. And so the best organizations, I think the previous panel mentioned this, some organizations have adopted a pretty robust risk framework where they don't try to put everything in one bucket of compliance. So there's almost a path to go down where it's like this is earlier on where we know we're an innovative stance, we know that we're here to learn, we can figure out some of the more detailed compliance stuff later, but really the goal is to see early success. And so those organizations were the best set up to actually allow this innovation. But the ones where it's you show up and because they are part of their application somewhere, does payment cards, so PCI applies, and then they've got their SOC 2 audit, high trust, et cetera, suddenly you're just blocked because the teams beneath the execs just don't know how to function like this. And on this front, one of the things that we were talking about tools, it's funny, I celebrate my team bringing in new tools and new approaches, but when you get into an enterprise world, there's a term that shows up for that, and it's called shadow IT. It's this idea that your people are bringing these tools in, and we're all investing all this money to both find it and then stop it, and a lot of times it's punitive, which makes sense from a compliance and security standpoint. But it's how do you go from shadow IT is this bad thing and we need to stop it as our first stance to how do we embrace people coming to us with a tool and make it easy for them to try out that tool. But yeah.
And Jan, building virtual worlds, you're working with very large brands. I think it's kind of interesting that they're aware of virtual world building and the need to reach their customers in new ways. What did you see in that ecosystem?
Yeah, so just for context, in my recent company, Supersocial, we've been really, some of our customers and clients and partners are multinational, anywhere from Gucci to Walmart and cosmetics companies, entertainment companies like Bandai Namco, Warner Brothers, et cetera. And I think And we've been working mostly with, CMOs and marketing leadership organization and sometimes chief digital officers. And, I think it's pretty incredible to see these massive organizations realizing the transition of the internet, right? And in terms of like where people are, what they're experiencing. And again, that quote I mentioned about children being the R&D department of the human species is, if you look at where young people are today on the internet, it kind of tells you everything you need to know potentially on where the internet is going and how rapidly we're effectively moving from what is going to be considered kind of the doom scroll, right? Like never-ending scrolling in 2D interfaces. And over the past 5-7 years, to a large extent because of COVID accelerating that trend, is you're now seeing young people experiencing the internet in ways that are quite dramatically different than the way we've experienced the internet over the last 25 years, right? Which means it's avatar-based, right? 3D avatars. They're essentially experiencing an internet that is much more immersive, where they have a sense of presence. If you look at anywhere from platform like Roblox, which now has about 100 million daily active users and about 500 million monthly active users, which is gigantic. And if you have kids who are under age 20, 25, you're most likely been spending quite a lot of money in buying them Robux over the last few years. And we may think about it as a toy, but this is the modality of interaction of how they are interfacing with their friends, how they're interfacing with the internet, and most importantly, the way they perceive their identity. And I don't know the timeline necessarily, but I think I'm pretty convinced that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, there's going to be a whole generation that is going to think about their virtual identity and invest in it as much as, if not more, than their real life identity, which means that the real life identity and the virtual identity will just merge together. And I think when we've been working with these large enterprises, they understand that. And they understand that while it's not happening tomorrow, it certainly means that they need to learn about the consumer behavior, the user preferences, and what exactly is happening in these platforms. Why on earth the average time spent per day by a daily user on Roblox is 2.5 hours, which is the highest on the internet. Think about it. It's effectively mean that Roblox is the most engaging internet platform in the world. Why are they spending so much time there? Why do they care about their identity so much? And why is it so different from what we know? And so when the Walmarts of the world, the Gucci's of the world, cosmetics brands of the world, they come there, they don't anticipate conversion to purchase immediately. That may be something that is much more relevant in the long term, but it's really much more of almost like an anthropological experiment to really understand deeply why people are there, what are they doing with their time, and really start building relationship and resonance with these communities and be a part of those communities. And by the way, we've witnessed it before. I mean, when Facebook came out, how many people here were so excited when they launched their first Facebook page, right? And counted the like numbers on the page until they realized it's kind of insignificant. But Facebook became one of the world's biggest platform for small and medium-sized advertising and marketing, and is in charge of really helping a lot of businesses grow and build. And so, I think alongside AI and alongside the generational shift, there's just so many interesting things that are happening around how the internet is changing, consumer behavior is changing, and how there is an opportunity to really rethink for everyone here, what does it mean for your business?
Yeah, I really love this theme around responding to change, like being adaptive, not getting locked into the way that you used to do things, but even from the way you work to the way for a lot of companies to actually reach their customers is changing. And as I mentioned earlier, the technologies you work with do kind of reset the playing field for a lot of people entering the workforce because they can become experts in this technology because it's brand new. And I think similarly, in terms of business and startup opportunities, there are a lot of services that aren't going to be delivered the same way now that they were before AI, and I think this actually creates an opportunity for a lot of great businesses to be built, many of which I hope will be built here in Ohio. I mean, especially as we look at companies being increasingly built remotely now. For me to be able to build a impactful cloud computing platform, I wouldn't have been able to do that in Ohio 10, 20 years ago, but I can do that today, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to do it. I want to come back to the theme of doing meaningful work, and we've talked a lot about how people work, and we've talked about the customers, but let's connect those two dots. And I know in a lot of organizations, one of my favorite things at Root is we shipped very quickly. We would ship updates to our mobile app every single week. I remember we were 5 years building into the company, and we had shipped version 250 of the mobile app because, like clockwork, we were just shipping once a week. And this created like a really engaging environment for people to work in because they would just see the impact of their work. They would spend time working really hard on a new product feature, and when it was done, it didn't go through committees or quarterly review cycles or anything. It went pretty much straight to consumers, and then they would see feedback on the app or see a report from an analyst about the impact that it had on the business. I want to talk a little bit about this in your experiences. I know, David, I think our companies share something in common in terms of how closely we try to get our builders and engineers engaged with our customers, and would love for you to share a little bit about that at Empora.
Yeah, I think on the visibility front, I think the tight turnaround is important. So just this morning, I had a shadowing session with one of our customers yesterday, put pen to paper on something I needed engineering to do, and actually got a message when I was sitting over at that table that it's done and it's out in production. So that solves part of your problem. It's like it's the excitement, the energy of the rapid turn to customer need. I also think
so you were engaging with one of your customers. Like
yes.
the CTO of the company was on that call with a customer solving that problem.
Yeah. The end result of that customer, and this is a very anti-scale thing, but the problem the customer was having was effectively they had changed their password and didn't realize it, and we weren't communicating it effectively. So like that's this level of attention to detail. And I had a product manager on this call with me as well. My product manager is regularly on calls with customers. Especially what we've done is we've actually like bifurcated out our top 20. So here's the customers that are driving the top 20 of our business. Like, let's give them the white glove feel, like we're a small company, we can do it, but let's make sure that they feel like they've got what they need. And this customer, like, they recognized that it was something they probably could have solved themselves, but they got off that phone call, one of our top 20, super excited about kind of where the whole call ended and what we were gonna do to fix it for others moving forward. But I think the other piece of this too is like rapid delivery is extremely valuable to create excitement and energy, but it's also like turn on measurability. So like looking at that, allocating time, whether it's at stand-ups or some other time to be like, okay, we released this a week ago, what's happening? We released this 2 weeks ago, what's happening? And then allowing that to inform quick change as a follow-up. So it's easy to release the first thing, but if you don't have the follow-up to continue to measure, to continue to evolve it, like it starts to get to this place of why did I do it in the first place? And people start to doubt the initial investment. So definitely continuing to follow that up is important.
Yeah, I love this perspective on proactive customer service. I've had this in past experiences, and actually even at RWX, where for the work we're doing today, we run tens of thousands of virtual machines per day that are running customers' workloads, and we have really tight monitoring around how those are performing, but computers are inherently can be unreliable, like networks can be unreliable, servers can crash, all kinds of issues, and we've worked over time to like improve the reliability of our platform to the point where it's really great, but even at 99.99% reliability, errors are going to happen every once in a while. And when we detect those, we proactively reach out to our customers and we're like, hey, we just saw that this error happened, just so you know, we detected it, we're on top of it. And sometimes customers are so incredibly impressed by the fact that they ran into an issue in our system, but we reached out to them to let them know about it, that we've often wondered, like, should we leave those bugs in there? It just created such like a transformative experience for them, and I think it's really important. As you admitted, it can be hard to do at higher scales, but I do think it's such an important part of product delivery, just keeping builders really close to the customers that are using their products. On the note of working iteratively, you mentioned the importance of like shipping quickly. What does that look like? I talk to a lot of organizations that work in sprints, but I feel like it varies in terms of maybe how quickly that work is actually getting released. Could you walk me through as you guys are working on things? I'm curious, like Jan, are you working with a brand and designing their entire world up front? Are you presenting it to them as you go along? Like, what does shipping velocity and iteration speed look like?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really fortunate to build on platforms with a tech stack that allowed us to move so fast, naming Roblox as an example. And, I think what we've discovered is that the brands that are doing the best in terms of the business objective that they would like to accomplish from a marketing standpoint, we've discovered that the one that are able to move at the speed of the platforms is incredibly important. And where brands or enterprises that have been just very slow with decision making and the velocity was just not there, it's just so much counter to the way a lot of these next generation internet consumer platforms are operating. And that's what, to a large extent, what we've been trying to educate brands and leaders is you have to move at the speed of the platform. And honestly, I don't think it necessarily matters if it's consumer or if it's a B2B. I think because there's such a merging of these worlds at the moment, especially because of AI. And so I think it's more of a mindset. And so we've seen great success with enterprises and leaders who can deliver velocity despite uncertainty and lack of knowledge and trusting us with decision making. And we've seen where it's much more difficult with brands and enterprises that are unable for some reason to adopt velocity of decision making and move at the speed of the platform. And I also think that's the advantage, and that's one of the most beautiful things of having startups or early stage companies working with large enterprises, where both sides can really learn. There's so much incredible things that obviously large enterprises and large corporations are doing, otherwise they would not have gotten to the size and the scale they're at. And that startups and emerging companies can learn from. But there's a lot of great things that startups at the early stage are doing in terms of iteration, mindset, DNA, organizational DNA, of course, innovation, disruption that could be so valuable. And that's one of the things that I feel there's such an amazing opportunity, for Ohio companies to have a tighter collaboration, not just in the sense of like, what startups are building things that can actually provide value to customers that are large enterprises, but also, and perhaps more importantly at times, collaborating just for the sakes of learning. Here's what we do and how we do, and here's what we do and how we do. Because I think ultimately that's one of the things that I believe propelled ecosystems, again, like Israel and London and Silicon Valley to what it is. And I think it will be one of the critical components of what can make Ohio a powerhouse in the next few decades.
Yeah, I really like that perspective around meeting consumers where they're at, responding to changes, responding to the platform. Like I can't tell you how many times in my career, like somebody's asked me as an engineer how long it's going to take to build something. And I always try to convey like, well, we can build that in a month, but then it's also going to take time over time to maintain it, adjust it, update it. And some of this is forced because technology does change. Devices change, interfaces change, and consumers like expect the applications they're using to feel familiar to those interfaces, and that's something that is kind of new. I think brick and mortar retailers don't quite have sure they'll maybe very slowly over time change how they're presenting things, but software changes at a much rapid pace, and I've definitely seen the best organizations are the ones that can really not just do a one-time investment in building a technology, but recognize that it's an experience and needs curated and adjusted over time. I also find this like a really impactful way to maintain quality in a product and set priorities. I can't tell you how many times in a startup I've used the word anticipatory when building new features, because you always have way more things to try to build and get done than you are actually going to have the capacity to do. And it is very hard to prioritize those because effectively you find yourself in the business of predicting the future. It's like we know we're going to need all of these, but what we don't know is how badly we're going to need it, when we're going to need it. And I find that that uncertainty can sometimes result in organizations moving really slowly, where some of the best performing organizations I've seen are the ones where they ship early, they do gradual rollouts, they release something to maybe just a subset of people, and then they let that usage and that engagement drive the priorities from there. Because it's really hard to get it right. I've spent countless hours with my engineering team, and especially we're building an engineering product. We're building a cloud computing product. And I can't tell you how many times I've just spent all day with my engineers talking through how to build a feature, and an engineer gets about 30 minutes into it, and they're like, this isn't going to work. Because they actually opened up the code, went to make the change, and realized that we somehow, in all of that discussion, failed to anticipate something that was actually going to change what we need to do or how we needed to implement that.
Well, and I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, Dan, which I think was really important, is when we talk about meaningful work. And again, I think we're at a step change in terms of the generational shift that is happening. And I think it's pretty much a fact at the moment that the very best talent is going to want to work in high-performing, velocity-driven organizations, right? And I think if you want to attract as an organization the very best talent, you just have to adapt to the way they want to build. And sure, like there are always going to be people, per se, right? But finding, attracting, and most importantly, retaining the very best talent, I believe in the next decade or two, from what I've seen over the last 5 years, employing a lot of Gen Z talent, they not only want to feel empowered and grow, but they actually believe that they're capable. It used to be that as a fresh graduate, if you're a 20-something-year-old, you're like, thank you for taking me through the job, really appreciate it. Now it's like, I'm out. Like, I'm not growing. This is not meaningful work. You're not listening to me. You know how many times people have told me, like, Jan, you're not listening. And so, I think I had to like really train and still do, train myself to like just really try and listen to what the very best people and the most talented people in our organization have been telling us. And I think empowering that generation, but also, of course, maintaining certain level of moderation and mentoring, et cetera, because obviously they don't know all the answers. But to me, that's part of meaningful work, is feeling like they're pushing the boundaries. They're able to experiment. They can use tools. They can deploy their curiosity and put all of that to the benefit of their employer are all incredible opportunities.
Yeah. Tying these ideas together, one of the things I think about, Dan, you mentioned this idea that it's like predicting the future. Well, an extension of that is you are going to get it wrong, and it's surprising how quickly I think I understand something, and then I'm going back to the drawing board to be like, no, that's actually new information. I need to pivot. From an engineering standpoint, one of the things most engineers, like a high performer, can't stand more than anything is the effort that just never even sees the light of day. And so if I commit to something that's of a more waterfall nature, it's going to take them 2 weeks to get out, and then I determine that like new information come in, I need to prioritize this down. I've just taken that engineer and completely demotivated them, so it's worth the extra effort to figure out like, how do I break this down into pieces so if I do pull it back, I'm at least learning something, I at least have some marginal value add, and it saves the engineer's sanity, for lack of a better word.
For sure. So we began this session by talking about things we've seen in other ecosystems, and I think we all want Ohio to become that. We want Ohio to be a place that others talk about emulating, and that they say, how do we build technology? How do we cultivate our ecosystem, like what is happening in Ohio? I'm just curious, as we wrap up here, you talked about taking risks, collaboration between enterprises and startups. Thoughts from either of you around what else we should be doing here to become that emulation-worthy tech hub?
Yeah, I would start, collaboration was mentioned. I think that is a huge opportunity, like especially between enterprises and startups. Dan has talked a little bit about like how he approaches support through Slack. Full transparency, we are one of RWX's customers, and there is something very intriguing about watching your engineering team connecting to another engineering team and them effectively innovating together. Like RWX is, and there's a couple other startups. We've got a startup that drives some of our visualizations and data analytics. They also have Slack channels, and I actually hear kind of changes that are kind of pushing out to other organizations show up in my engineering stand-up. So it's like this product cross-pollination innovation thing that's going on, and I don't think that's unique to startup. The only thing is really that startups are, earlier stage companies are more willing to kind of go down the path with an earlier stage company, but I think like enterprises could have that same experience at an engineering level.
Yeah, I think there's just, in the 5 years I've lived in Columbus, there's just so many incredible things that are happening in Columbus and the wider state, and I think the next decade and two should be, Buckeye decades, and like really empower the builders, hire the greatest builders, invest in the greatest builders, help incubate the greatest builders. It's been such an inspiring session earlier with OSU University and Shireen to just hear about the initiatives that are happening in OSU. Naturally, it's amazing to have entrepreneurs like Dan here. For anyone who hasn't, I know Dan is no longer involved with Root, but for anyone who has seen the Root stock, one of the best performing NASDAQ stock over the past 12 months, right here in Columbus, right? I think the football team is making so much noise. I think Ohio Tech needs to make much more noise and get that Buckeye spirit out there and show that, someone once told me, justice needs to be shown, not just to be done. I think there's a lot of justice being done. I think we need to show it and celebrate it and make some noise, empower the builders, invest in the builders, and get them out there. Not only startups, but also big enterprises, and finding those ways to collaborate and get the noise out there.
Really well said. Well, I'm really honored to be on stage with two accomplished builders, great people of the Ohio tech community here, and it could have been better said. Really